how exactly was Bristol connected to slavery and why?
So Bristol really was linked by trade, and it was not just a trade in enslaved people, but it was a trade in all the commodities that were associated with the slave, what we call the Atlantic slavery economy. So you had Bristol traders from really the 1500s onwards, but more formally in the 1600s, trading, exporting goods to the West African coast, trading under the aegis of Spanish and Portuguese powers, and then trading in enslaved Africans. But that was just a small part of the whole sort of international trade of Bristol, particularly from the 1600s. It was really the trade in slave-produced goods like tobacco and coffee and cotton and, of course, sugar, but also the processing of those goods that were brought back to the British mainland and spawning refining industries, et cetera, and then re-exported. A lot more people were involved in the administration and governance of slave colonies, in plantations. Often merchants would lend money to plantation owners who were cash poor and then inherit plantations. They might be indirectly involved by investing in things like the Royal African Company and the South Sea Company, which had their interests in slave trading. Or they might be linked through employing Black servants on the British mainland. That was quite small in number, but quite important. So there were all different ways in which people could be implicated in the wider slave trade.
We were wondering, how does your research work, Madge? How does it, particularly on Bristol and slavery, what does it actually involve?
My interest started by looking at the networks of families and business associates in Bristol, and particular buildings. And I realized that in an era where there weren't that many people around, I mean, you know, we're talking about Bristol being like 25,000 people in the 1700s. So it was a face-to-face society. And once you start looking at their family connections or a particular building, you realize that all these families are kind of related. They have trading links. And so I started looking at wills and property deeds and looking at the connections, the way that industries got founded, and connecting up all these kind of disconnected fragments of information, so which makes it hard, you know, you have to be a bit of a genealogist as well as a historian of place to marry up these pieces of evidence. So I went all over. I went to London. I went to I researched in Virginia, Carolina, but also the national as well as the local archives. And together I found all these sort of trading networks emerging that link Bristol and its environs to slavery.
My other question would be that there are a number of country houses in the Bristol area, and we wondered what you had found, or what connections you had found to slavery specifically.
You realize that there were all these relationships between these beautiful country houses and slavery interests that you wouldn't have suspected before. And there's a lot of work still to be done to unearth all of these. And that's why the National Trust, the Historic England, Colonial Countryside, they've all been doing these forensic investigations of particular properties to see what their links are to the slave trade. But honestly, the more you look, the more you find. And a lot of these houses have now been demolished, or they're under a Toys R Us development or something, and their history completely forgotten. And I think it's really, or you only see the remnant of a garden. Like we have a beautiful garden in Bristol, Oldbury Court, and it was Oldbury Court itself had relations with the Vassal family and all sorts of West Indian and slave trading connections, which, you know, have got forgotten. And all we think about are the beautiful, you know, ways in which, you know, Capability Brown or some of these other landscape gardeners have made these, you know, just gorgeous places. And they are beautiful, right? Or, you know, a beautiful mahogany staircase at Blaze Castle, Blaze House outside of Bristol. And then you're thinking, who produced the mahogany? You know, it was it was enslaved labor. You know,
Yeah.
what about those Chippendale chairs? Who is the patron of Capability Brown? And you know, or a lot of the interior designers like Gridlin Gibbons and wood carvers like that. And you look, and a lot of their patronage was from people with slavery interests. So you have a kind of intersection between beautiful things that are beautiful, you know, and should be treasured, but they do have a backstory.